Join the conversation.
Join the conversation.
You're with Cape Talk.
It's Friday. Welcome to Views and News. It's 9:36. My name, Clarence, and of course that big appointment with our very own naked scientist, Dr. Chris Smith, a consultant virologist at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, also known as the Naked Scientist, of course, and he's on air every Friday at 9:30. Bob has called in, and we're prioritizing his call. Welcome, Bob. Are you well?
Hi. Yes, I'm very well. And yourself?
I cannot complain. I think it's such an important question that you're going to put to the naked scientist. Let us welcome Dr. Chris Smith. Welcome, Chris. Great to have you back.
Morning, Clarence. Morning, Bob.
Morning. My question is the mispronunciation of the letter R, and it comes out as a W, seems to, in my experience, to be restricted to upper class English men. Is that a correct observation? And if so, why?
Hi, Bob. This is called rhotacism, the correct name for the inability to pronounce R's where they emerge as W's. It's not just men. It's not just the preserve of posh blokes. There are quite a few prominent females who also do pronounce this, including some who are on television. So it certainly doesn't hold your career back. I'm not sure why some people can't do that, but I think it's probably similar to the fact that if some people want to roll their R's and make a brrr noise, I can't do that. I honestly can't. My son, no problem. Some people can curl their tongue into almost like a trefoil shape. I cannot roll up my tongue like that. Other people, no problem. So I suspect that part of this is because speaking is one of the most complicated sequences of movements that we can make as a human. Because if you think about what it involves, it's the coordination of the flow of breath, so that's diaphragm control, the control of the larynx, which are the flaps of tissue where the Adam's apple is in the neck, which open and close to create pressure bursts of air, shaping the mouth, and that includes moving the tongue around, shaping the face and shaping the lips in order to get the right sounds to amplify in the right way. It's a really complicated, coordinated sequence of movements. And not everyone can make them all in the right order at the right time to get the right sound. And I suspect that this is part and parcel. What's a really intriguing question, though, and I don't know the answer to this, and if anyone does, people who speak other languages, is there the equivalent of rhotacism coming out with R's as W's in other languages? Now, Clarence hinted at this, perhaps in other countries that there is the equivalent. I'd be fascinated to hear people's experience. I mean, I suppose there's the classic one, which is people from Japan do struggle to say R, because I went to school with a Japanese guy from Tokyo, and he could not say R. It used to come out as L. And so he would describe the sport we played with an oval ball as rugby. And the funny thing is, we sat down at lunch one day, and he said, I said, well, say R. And he said, R. And I said, now say rugby. And he'd say rugby. and it was because the coordination of putting the sounds together to create the sequence, with practice, he probably would have been fine. But I think it's that does it to people. But I would be fascinated to hear other examples of that if anyone would like to share them. So I'm sorry I can't give you a direct answer to the question, but I can speculate it is because it's a complicated movement sequence that not everyone can make, in the same way that I can't roll my R's or roll my tongue into tubes.
Yeah. And it's very obvious in Thailand. I've got a lot of friends there, and to them I am Clarence. So yeah, they turn
it's
that
the same thing, and it's funny
off.
how it's this R sound that seems to trigger problems. It must be something to do with the movement required to create that shape of the face and the tongue and the lips in order to get the sound out that is difficult, if it doesn't occur naturally in a language, for some people to make.
Okay, question in. I have a question for the naked scientist. Why does my perception of time differ depending on the situation? When I'm in a lecture, it feels like it's taking decades to pass. But when I'm enjoying time with family and friends, it flies. Also, as I grow older, time really seems to go by quickly. We've had this question before. I guess this particular listener is now also becoming older.
The argument for this is obviously it's based on speculation because we can't really ask animals how they perceive time to be passing. So you can only do this in humans, and that limits, for ethical reasons, what you can do and the information you can elicit. But the recurrent pattern that emerges is that when people are having a very exciting time, they tend to notice that time passes in a flash. They really enjoyed themselves. And this is probably because when we have a novel experience, the brain pays more attention to it. If you flip that round and say, do you remember driving to work this morning on the route that you always take? Many people will remember snapshots of their journey to work, but they'll very often say, do you know what? There was a period of that journey when I must have gone round 2 roundabouts, 3 sets of traffic lights. I don't remember any of it. I just almost autopilot. So when the brain is experiencing novelty, it tends to make more memories. The way that we gauge the passage of time is we look at how many memories are assigned to a certain patch of time or a period of time. And our brain then says, well, if there are 50 million memories from that patch of time, that must be a really long time, or it must be a really short time. Because we know that the journey to work is a short time, or let's say the day at the fairground is a short time, it's only a day, but you remember loads and loads about it, the brain then says, well, that must have gone really quickly to have packed all that information in there. So we are distorting our sense of time by how much information we store, and the brain works out the passage of time based on the density of information stored. And if you take it another way, which is people often say when something awful happens, like a road traffic accident, or they can see something awful about to happen and then it does, time seems to slow down. Well, under those circumstances, we know psychologically, well, that must have happened very, very quickly, but we have a really dense pattern of memories relating to that period of time. So the only way that those memories must have packed into such a short time is it must have taken forever. So our perception of time slows right down. And people have done experiments on this. They do things like there was one famous series of experiments where people were jumping, doing a bungee jump, which was terrifying for them, and they were watching a clock. And so they were able to work out what their own perception of time was versus the real passage of time. And in everyone's case, they had very rich memories of the experience, and time did appear to be slowing down because they were experiencing the novelty of this terrifying experience. So it's really a subjective thing. Our brains are very subjective about how we gauge the passage of time based on the richness of the memories we're laying down and the novelty of the experience. And that means that we cannot rely really on our sense of passage of time very well. We tend to know what time of day it is if we try and guess quite well. But if you ask people how long things take, they're very, very inaccurate at that, and it's very much driven by the novelty and the excitement they're experiencing at the time when they're going through that period.
Colin writes, good morning, Clarence and the good doctor. My question, does long life milk have any nutritional value?
Milk is milk, and milk is full of protein and calcium, water, and a few other salts. And the reason that we long life it is that we want to make it not go off, because one of the other things in milk is full of microorganisms. It's a body product. It's usually from cows, but goats and sheep and so on also produce milk. Humans produce milk. But there are loads of microorganisms in the milk because as the milk exits the body, microbes from the tissue and the nipple tissue get into the milk and they will begin to grow because milk is at a lovely warm temperature, it's body temperature, ideal for the microbes that like living on the body, and you're giving them a rich source of energy, all that protein, all those sugars, all that fat, and there's salts and nutrients and so on. So very quickly microbes grow and they would make the milk go off. And so when you sterilise milk and make it long life, you inactivate those microorganisms. But you don't take away the fats, you don't take away the sugars, you don't take away the proteins, you don't take away the salts, the calcium and so on. That's all still in there. You just affect the fact that the milk may have a character change because some of the proteins may denature a bit because of the high temperature, and you've destroyed the microorganisms so they cannot contribute to the milk going off, or looking at it another way, turning into cheese. So yes, it has plenty of nutritional value, but it just will taste a bit different, but it won't turn into cheese if you give it the chance.
From Mandy, what color is a mirror? We say they're silver, but if they reflect everything, shouldn't they be every color?
Well, the thing you see in the mirror is, but if you look at a mirror, of course, what you're seeing is a silver surface because it's a highly reflective, polished surface. And the way that a mirror works is that when beam or spots of light hit the surface of the mirror, they excite on the atoms of the silver at the back of the mirror, the cloud of electrons around those atoms. Those electrons are made to vibrate, and as the electrons vibrate, if you have a moving charge, you have a changing electromagnetic field, which then in turn spits back a photon as the mirror image photon. So you create light coming back the other way as these electrons, having shifted around, release the energy you've put into them. So the mirror will show you photons that were hitting it coming back at you, but when you look at the mirror surface is a silver because it is highly reflective, because it's got a surface which is returning the light rays to you, but it does look a silver colour.
And a reminder, it's The Naked Scientist. It is, of course, Dr. Chris Smith with us, a consultant virologist at Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge. And you may have a question for him. You're welcome to put that question via WhatsApp 072 567 1567. That's what Zuki has done. Welcome, Zuki. Go ahead for The Naked Scientist.
Just firstly to comment on the, roticism. It's interesting that the word starts with a problematic letter. And then the second thing I wanted to say was I know that some Sotho-speaking people also struggle with pronouncing a R with the front of the tongue, and they kind of use the back of the throat. So instead of a R sound, it makes a R sound. So I thought that's quite fascinating. But my question is about height. So I know that malnutrition can stunt growth, but is there anything that people can do to promote growth in terms of height over and above what genetics will allow?
Hi, Zuki. Yeah, you're quite right that the biggest determinant of how tall we are is what we eat. You are what you eat, because when we eat, that's a source of energy. It's also a source of protein and the building blocks of the body. And therefore, if you starve the body of building blocks, it's a bit like me handing you a set of plans for a house and saying, you've got to build this house, but I'm only going to give you half as many bricks as the plan specifies. So what would you do? Well, you'd say, well, if I use half as many bricks everywhere, I'll get the right proportion of house. It'll just be smaller. And that's what happens to the body. That's why malnutrition stunts growth, because the plans are like your genetics. They're the plan that says how big to build something if you've got all the right materials. The food is the raw materials, and therefore the stipulation as to how big you can build your house. There are some situations, though, where people will overgrow. And genetics aside, there are diseases where people produce an excess of growth hormone, for example. If this is present at birth, then you can develop gigantism. And in gigantism, all the tissues are exposed to an excessive growth signal, and people can become huge. And there are individuals, I mean, the tallest man, I think he was a man, was 8+ feet tall or higher. Extraordinary, probably because of an excess sensitivity or production of growth hormone. There's also an acquired state called acromegaly, where people don't get taller, but they do get bigger, again, because of an overproduction of a growth hormone-like signal, which makes the head get bigger, the hands get bigger, feet get bigger. So there are conditions where people will grow, but height, because of the way the body grows, if you're going to get too tall, that has to happen before your growth plates fuse in your bones, because the way we grow tall is our long bones, such as the femurs, in our tops of our legs, they have in the middle of the bone a thing called a growth plate. And in that area, there are cells making cartilage which jack up the bones away from the growth plate in each direction, and then bone cells called osteoblasts move in from the bone margins and they lay down bone material in the cartilage model. And as we grow older, the edges of the growth plate narrow, so the two bits where it's turning into bone get closer and closer and closer until we're about mid-teenage in girls and a little bit older in boys, and the two fuse together. You lose the ability to make more cartilage model and your bone doesn't get any longer. So that is why in a condition like acromegaly, too much growth hormone acquired in adulthood, certain bits of the body which grow a different way, the hands, the feet, the face, head, they can get bigger, but we don't gain height when we're older. But if you have too much growth stimulus there from the get-go and those growth plates never fuse, you just keep making the bones longer and longer and longer, and you gain enormous amounts of height. And that is often very, very much pathological.
Ai Hatun says, take a look at the man in the mirror. Could you ask Dr. Chris if a different mirror makes you look different? because I feel I look fairly good at the gym in that mirror, but at home I look like a middle-aged fat slob.
Well, the other important thing about mirror, I mean, people are saying, what colour are they? Obviously, mirrors are glass with a silver layer behind them. And we say, well, the mirror is a silver colour because it's highly reflective. But you often do get a greeny hue to a mirror. If you look at a mirror, you'll also see that the colour is a bit green. And that's actually a function of the glass. Because when they make the glass, they often put various chemicals into the glass to give it the properties that it does. And that can impart colour. So that's another thing I should have possibly mentioned earlier. But the thing that really determines what you see in the mirror is the shape of the mirror. Because a mirror is a flat surface if it's on the wall of your living room to give you a more accurate representation of what you look like. But if you bend or distort the mirror, you bend or distort the pattern of light that it reflects, and therefore you can have the effect of making the mirror behave a bit like a lens. And up in space, the Hubble Space Telescope is watching the stars by using mirrors in order to focus light. And some of the biggest telescopes on the Earth's surface have enormous great mirrors. The James Webb Space Telescope has an enormous great compound mirror. This actually uses the mirror surface to reflect light, but also to change the path of the light so you can focus light with the mirror. Now, if you go to a hall of mirrors where the mirrors have all been made wonky on purpose, you can produce some really quite phenomenal distortions where you do look extremely weird. And it's exactly the same science as if you hold up a spoon and look at yourself in a spoon, you will see not just an upside down Clarence, but you will also see quite a dysmorphic Clarence, because the spoon is a curved surface, and that has the effect of focusing the light beam, but not uniformly across its surface. It's focusing different bits of the light to a different extent. So it tends to have the effect of distorting some bits of the image and stretching them and shrinking others. And that's why your face looks a bit weird when you look in either the back or the front of a spoon. But it's exactly the same science that's applied to what goes on when we want to focus light in a microscope or a telescope.
And then a message from Corley: is magnesium glycinate safe for everyone?
I'm not sure what that is. What's the chemical? Magnesium?
Glycine.
Oh, glycerate, magnesium glycerate. Well, magnesium is a salt that we need a small amount of in our diet. Everyone needs a certain amount of magnesium. If you don't have enough magnesium, then things like the process of neurotransmission don't work properly. So we all have an absolute demand for a small amount of this stuff. But like all these things, what is there and helpful in small amounts is not necessarily helpful in large amounts. So the glycerate bit just refers to the fact that there is a sugar part of the salt, and the magnesium is going to be the metal part of the salt. So the glycerate's irrelevant. Magnesium in small amounts, really, really useful. Too much magnesium, you will have side effects. And one of the biggest side effects of eating a lot of magnesium, which you'll get if you eat Epsom salts, for example, is it has an osmotic diarrheal effect. So the magnesium will pull water out of the wall of your intestine. It won't be reabsorbed sufficiently, and you will get the squits. So be very careful with excessive magnesium intake. It may have unintended consequences.
Okay, now we have a question in about, will river fish live if you put it in salt water, or vice versa?
Fish are adapted to the environment in which they have to live their lives. There are freshwater fish, there are saltwater fish. There are also some fish that can transition between the two, and when they do transition between the two, they change their physiology accordingly to compensate so that they can survive. But if you take a freshwater adaptive fish and chuck it straight in the sea, or vice versa, it will not end well for the fish. Because the reason is this: if you have a fish that lives in fresh water, the fish gets oxygen through its gills, which are a fine network of blood vessels at the front of the fish's head, where water passing over the gills sees that fine network of blood vessels, and the blood vessels pull oxygen out of the water. Now, fresh water wants to move, because there's a lot of water and very few salts, from an area where there's lots of water to a saltier area to balance things up. The fish is very salty, so the water comes out of the water and into the fish. So the fish has got mechanisms to lose all that extra water when it's living in fresh water. A saltwater fish has the opposite problem. The water that it's seeing in its gills is far more concentrated than the blood of the fish. So the fish is consistently losing water into the sea. So it has mechanisms to compensate, to reverse that effect and keep the fish from being dehydrated. That transition, if you have a fish that goes between fresh and salt water, does not happen instantly. The fish adapts slowly to that process as it comes out of a river and then goes into the sea, like a salmon, for example. But if you just took one fish from one environment and put it in the other, because of that salt and osmotic effect, it would very quickly compromise the fish. So the fish do this over a period of time. They don't just suddenly overnight flick a switch and I'm a saltwater fish now.
And I think we're going to have to leave this question over for next week. How does the stomach lining distinguish between the protein in a steak and the protein that makes up the stomach wall itself? Why don't we digest ourselves?
Well,
Do you
that's
want to leave it over
food for thought for next time. No, it's a very easy one to answer, which is that the food that you eat is broken up by your teeth, brutalized by stomach acid, attacked by pepsin, which is the protease in the stomach, and also proteases in pancreatic juice. But the lining of the stomach and the lining of the intestine has a number of defenses. One of them is that the cells grow very fast. The other is that they produce a layer of mucus, which acts as a barrier between those extremely corrosive stomach and intestinal juice contents and the lining of the stomach. But when that goes wrong, when it breaks down, it can be life-threatening because that is peptic ulcer disease and you're at risk of getting either a gastric or duodenal ulcer, and they can be life-threatening.
and possibly digested as well.
Exactly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chris Smith, the Naked Scientist, every Friday after 9:30. The discoveries here are absolutely incredible. Join us next week with your question.